right, everyone, welcome back to Money Show's Cannabis Investing Virtual Expo. We are pleased to welcome Michael Paulenoff. He's a technical strategist and author of mptrader.com, a real-time diary of his index and sector analysis and trade alerts. He's a 32-year Wall Street veteran, formerly with Smith Barney, Harris Upham, Drexel Burnham Lambert, and Republic National Bank. Mr. Paulenoff is a popular speaker at financial forums and conferences and is widely published on sites such as The Street, MarketWatch, NASDAQ.com, and Business Insider. He's also co-author of the Business One Irwin Guide to the Futures Markets with Stanley Kroll. Michael, thank you so much for being here. It's all yours, sir.
Thanks a lot, Mark. I appreciate it. Hi, everyone. Well, I find myself, or we find ourselves together to talk about the cannabis space, of all things. It is a space that, well, reacts to nothing except perhaps Wall Street bets and the Reddit crowd. They seem to have the ability to jam the shorts and to run the market. But as soon as the fundamentals, whatever fundamentals there are, make themselves or reassert themselves, then the cannabis space becomes a short seller's duck shooting gallery, it has been for the last few years. But before we get to that, let me introduce myself. You can see on your screen my website, mptrader.com. I started writing this on the site, or I started, my partner and I created the site in 2003, believe it or not. So we've been around a long time, seen a lot of markets, and that was 20 years into my career already, almost. Mark mentioned in the introduction that I was with Smith Barney, Drexel Burnham, and Republic National Bank. And of course, none of those companies are around anymore. I think actually of the firms that I worked for in my Wall Street career, I don't think there's one that's actually left either as a standalone entity that hasn't been taken out or its name has changed, or that didn't go out of business, i.e. Drexel Burnham. And I'm pretty sure that had Drexel survived, I would have survived with it and probably been a lifer there, because that was one great firm. In any case, here I am doing mostly technical analysis. And I would say, to describe my work, I use technical analysis. In my career, I was introduced to the technicals first, and then overlaid, and then discovered that I should overlay the fundamentals on top of the technicals, not the other way around. So through my career, anybody who has been on the technical side of the markets for the last 35, 40 years will probably have the same experience, or will probably be able to relate the same experience that I have and had, is that the technicals were the black sheep of the Wall Street community. In fact, when I worked at Smith Barney, they quarantined us on 333 West 34th Street in New York City in an old in an old building that used to make garments, and we weren't even in the headquarters. That's how segregated the commodity division was from the rest of the street. And in addition, the technical analysis department within the commodity division, that was even further down the line. In any case, so that's so much I've had to overcome, and anybody who does technical work has to overcome the stigma attached to looking at lines on a piece of paper and having people adjust thinking they mean something. Well, they do, and it's all psychology, and it's all a massive psychological picture of price, action, and movement. Okay, so let's get that out of the way. The website, I'll give you a thumbnail of the website. This is the front page of the website. It tells you how to join, blah, blah, blah. Every weekend I do a top call, And this past weekend, I wrote up my my TLT, or T-bond ETF technical and, I would say, psychological overlay. I mean, it's a little hard to do the TLTs without discussing interest rates, don't you think? And interest rates are a macro market, and I've experienced 40 years of macro changes, and I overlay them on my chart of TLTs, for instance, and you can read that if you want. And then if we go into, if we go into our live trading room, which you can see, this is actual today, and you can see as I scroll down, there are members who write whatever and whenever they want about anything they want. You can see I did back-to-back Apple updates because Apple was pushing through a resistance line and looked like it's going to 180 to me, if not higher. And I was using that in conjunction with the spiders, which you can see on this chart. And that gave a thumbnail of what I thought the spiders might be doing. And if Apple's not going down, neither are the spiders. So that's the kind of thing we do, and we discuss all this stuff. And yeah, here I discuss the XME, which I'm going to show you in a minute, because the XME is industrial metals. How does that relate to pot? It doesn't, but it's a commodity-based ETF. That is the companies that you can see right here that produce the industrial metals. Well, they're not producing enough of it, enough of those metals, no matter what they are: aluminum, copper, zinc, you name it, lead, and iron ore, etc. And there's just not enough of it. And pot has the opposite problem, which we'll get to in a minute. And of course, you know, I had asked something about pot on the site today, and one of our subscribers, members, long-term member, Mary, who follows it closely, chimed in, and she was talking about the prospects for you know, the pot dispensaries to be able to safely do their banking. And she said the sector is cheap, and we'll look at some charts in a minute, and she's certainly right about that. So anyway, this starts at, listen, it's a labor of love for me, and I'm a market junkie. And so I start this stuff very early in the morning, and every time either someone asks me about something or my own work, like this morning, my first update was pretty much about Facebook, and that it's now or down to 200 for Facebook. And so anyway, that's a thumbnail on my website. So now let me go over to my charting, and what you'll see now is my desktop, and I'll go over to the pot space for starters. So I guess in terms of the pot space, number one, over the next couple of weeks, I think there are a lot of earnings coming out, to the extent that these companies have earnings. But and secondly, let me change pages here one more time just to show you something. Where is let me see if it's on this page. Yep. Okay, so Seeking Alpha. Seeking Alpha is my go-to kind of fundamental / news / I guess post-earnings, pre-earnings update site. And I think it's a great site. And if we put in, say, Tilray, for instance, and you get all the articles, and if we go down to an article like this, cannabis stocks to end 2021 lower despite blah blah blah, and you can read about what the background information is for a lot of the companies that I'm doing technically. This coming year, there should be some movement on both banking and maybe even legalization, i.e. legalization hopes. Okay, well, for anybody who's been in this space before, hope springs eternal for the pot stocks. And if Tilray, let me scrunch up the chart to show you just where Tilray went. Well, that was when it first, after it went public, it went to 300. But last year, the Reddit crowd drove it up to almost $80. And once that move was done, Tilray resorted back to its bear market, its downtrend. But now, what are we looking at now? All right, so Tilray on the 28th last week hit a low of $5.10, believe it or not. Now, looks to me technically that Tilray is done down here. That $5 will be a floor forever and ever. Now, in order for it to get through this massive trend line, which cuts across the price axis around $8, to me, there has to be some change in the fundamentals. So Tilray can trade from 5 to 8, and pretty much nothing can happen unless, of course, the Reddit people, the Wall Street Bets crowd decides that that they want to jam the shorts. In any case, this dominant trend line cuts across the price axis at $8. So let's say 785 to 8. It gets through there, then I'll get my first real serious intermediate term buy signal in Tilray in a very, very long time. Now, what I expect to happen when it goes through here is I expect we'll get some articles that'll show up, all over the place. But in my case, I'll be looking for the synopsis of those articles on Seeking Alpha. And this is not an advertisement for Seeking Alpha. I just think they cover their bases very well on all sorts of sectors and in any number of ways on various stocks. But once we go through $8, I'll be expecting some hope springs eternal kind of articles that either Chuck Schumer, the majority leader of the Senate, will be able to cobble together enough votes to get the Senate to pass either and or banking and or legalization legislation. And I think the House side already has the votes to a large extent. And I think that through $8, we're going to get buy signals technically, as well as indications that there's movement in Congress. Now, maybe that's just a pipe dream, movement in Congress, but it is one major element that really has its boot on the neck of the cannabis industry. Here's another one. Now, Tilray is Canadian, Canopy too, and Canopy growth, it was at 56, got to 664 last week, a week ago Monday, whereas Tilray bottomed last Friday, or a week ago Friday. So the same thing holds true for Canopy growth. The $10 level. Now, if I blow this up, you'll see that the 50-day moving average in Canopy is at 882. My big level is $10, but the trend line, I'll unzoom it. That massive trend line that goes back to March of 21, almost a year ago, cuts across the price axis almost right at the same place as the 50-day MA. So for me, I'm looking at Canopy growth at, at 880 to 910, up to $10. That's the key level for me. And as it turns out, the next earnings is on February 9th, which happens to be tomorrow morning before the open. If you're a gambler, you can take a shot that Canopy will surprise the street in whatever way. And the reaction to earnings will be to the upside. Now, in order for it to make a difference technically, though, to go through $10, let's see, right now, Canopy is trading at 763. So we're talking about a 30% move just to get to $10 in reaction to a positive earnings report. It's unlikely that earnings will blow it through $10. But if it does get to $10, or let's say it takes out and closes above the 50-day MA, then we have ourselves a new ball game, or a ball game, that where you have a two-way market, and maybe, just maybe, all the action after December 15th to February 15th, as it were, which is next week, that 8 weeks is starting to look like a base that could propel and support a higher than $10 price for CGC. You all might have also known or seen that I had put down the short interest here. The short interest for CGC is 18%. It may be a lot more than that. That's what it said on Seeking Alpha. And I don't know how recently they updated those figures, but it still has a substantial short position, as do really most of the other cannabis names. And so once there is a reason for the shorts to get nervous, there is a plenty big short position to generate upside movement and violent upside movement. Okay, so on the US side, if you want to do an ETF, right, MSOS is the ETF, and for US cannabis shares. And it too peaked a year ago, almost $56, and hit its low also on January 24th, when that Monday low, when the market came, the overall market got hit really hard. And so it, in its own little microcosmic kind of way, is mimicking the overall market, except, of course, it doesn't show the ability to break the back of this downtrend, the intermediate term one or the nearer term one, but it's trying. So let me see when, hang on a second here. So let's do this. This is an exercise that I do with everything. I look at pure price action first. You can see the trend, the way the pattern is lined up, or the way the pattern has unfolded on the downside. And then I'm using TradeStation, by the way, to do these studies. I've used it for years, and I like it a lot. So if we decide to put, let's put my shorter term moving average cluster on there. And so right now I've put on the 10, the 17, and the 50-day MAs. And what we see, if I get rid of this trend line and blow it up a little bit, what we see is that the moving averages are all kind of railroad tracks on the downside, which means, with the exception of the 10-day that is trying to turn up, that there's some very powerful momentum moving average momentum on the downside that needs to be taken out to turn this ETF around, this American-based cannabis ETF around. For starters, this zone right here will need to be taken out. And what we're talking about is 23 to the moving average, the 50-day MA, which is at 24. So 23 to 24 gets taken out. Then we have the trend line, and the trend line is at around 27.15. And if that happens, then we have some price action that probably is anticipating some movement on the legalization or the banking front. And that, as we've discussed before, is really important for pot. It is the elephant in the room for the pot names. Now, of course, we all know that there's presumably enormous revenues, tax revenues from this stuff, but that that hasn't yet compelled Congress to look past whatever issues, whatever hangups they have, as it were, to pass these laws to enable the government to take in tax revenue. Well, I, for one, am a believer that tax revenues are going to be there. If wherever the government can find tax revenue, they're going to try to find it. If that's not hasn't been the case already, it's going to become increasingly the case up the road, especially as the deficit blows out from, or the debt, I should say, where, what are we at, $30 trillion? So, I mean, it would seem that Congress has to and will get together to pass these laws so they can collect lots of money from the cannabis industry. I want to show you another one that one of my subscribers, who I told you about before, Mary, introduced me to earlier today. Now, I have been following Abby V for a very long time for its pharmaceutical reasons. And you can see I do pretty in-depth, some would think, I guess, esoteric kind of work on it. But when it broke out in September, when it pulled back to its breakout, this base goes back to 2018. So when it broke out a year ago, or a little more than a year ago, and then pulled back to the breakout point right around 100 to 105 and turned up, that was one major bull signal. And sure enough, it's met every target and the measured movements all the way up Abby V. Now, Abby V is, if you go in and look at what Abby V does, they have all sorts of interesting drugs in their pipeline, and they make lots of money, on the pharmaceutical side. But Mary tells me that, informs us that this company owns many patents in the medicinal cannabis side of the business. And well, of course, I was joking with her earlier on the site that it's a good thing Abby V is not primarily known as a cannabis company, because it would be $6 rather than 142. Nonetheless, the fact that it is part of its inventory of potential blockbusters, this is a company you should keep in mind, Abby V, largely because it has, it makes money, number one, has huge earnings, is a major powerhouse in the industry, and it figures to be one in the cannabis sector as well. So let me change gears a little bit and go to some other maybe related things, maybe not, but in my mind, they're related. So here's the agricultural ETF. Now, last I checked, cannabis was a plant, or came from a plant, right? The medicinal side and the recreational side. And it would seem to me that the laws of economics still apply to cannabis, even though we have our doubts. Well, this is the agricultural ETF, and you can see now this is a daily chart, and it bottomed in the summer of 20, and we're in a massive bull market in agriculture in general, and there's part of my mind that thinks that cannabis, if DBA is a train, the caboose on the train is cannabis. And I think that the caboose car is attached, believe it or not, to this agricultural train, and it's going a lot higher, and it's going to drag cannabis with it. Now, this is the weekly chart. So here we go, 2000, what is this, 2013? Had a bear market into 2020, and now you're breaking out, making new highs, and DBA looks like, I don't know whether we're going to have crop failures, whether there's going to be freezes and global warming, global freezing, who knows? But what I'm thinking here is that cannabis will be the caboose on this train, and agriculture is going a lot higher. Earlier, I showed you, or was on the screen. Whoops, that's my technical work on S&P futures. Anyway, here's another commodity-oriented, commodity-based ETF, XME, which thrust out of a consolidation today, blasted out of this moving average cluster, and looks like it's trying, it will attack the resistance, 7 months of resistance, after going sideways. Looks like it has the potential to break out in a big way. And this is another commodity-based index or ETF. And the reason I bring it up is precisely because, just like cannabis, it too has supply demand issues. Yesterday, I think it was, on an interview on one of the networks, or I read it somewhere, either that or a quote from the Goldman Sachs commodity analyst, who was saying that there's shortages of everything. Every metal that's produced in this index, lead, zinc, aluminum, iron ore, you name it, there are shortages, and demand isn't tapering off at all, unless the Fed puts us into a recession, which is possible but unlikely, I guess. There are just shortages, and so you have agricultural weather issues and shortages. Fertilizer is another thing. We could go into fertilizer, but I don't have time because I'm running out of time here. But fertilizer is another thing where one of the Russian satellites, old Soviet satellites, produces like 40% of the fertilizer for the world. And of course, given the Ukraine situation, there's some real issues whether anybody's going to be able to get fertilizer if Putin decides to restrict it. So there are all sorts of issues, and that fertilizer issue could also be very germane to the pot space. So anyway, I have 2 minutes left, and what in case there are any questions or comments where we could get into a discussion, I really don't have time. But what I encourage you to do, you can send an email to info@mptrader.com, the name of my website. So info@mptrader.com, and refer to the cannabis webinar from February 8th, and it'll get to me. You can also send an email to patternanalytics.com, which is my company, but I prefer you sent it to info@mptrader.com, and I'll get back to you. But also, you might as well take the free trial from the website, and you can see how we operate in the discussion room, and we exchange charts and we do all sorts of things. And there are a lot of very bright people in there who have different interests, and those interests um, create great discussion, and people have different fortes, and we all learn a lot from each other, even though I'm the editor. So on that note, with right at the top of the hour, I guess I'll just leave it there, Mark, and I appreciate the opportunity.
All right, Michael, thank you so much for that fantastic presentation. Always a pleasure to hear you speak. You have a great evening, sir.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Mark. You too. And thanks
All right.
everyone else.